It was a quiet Tuesday morning when the message came. Not with sirens or explosions, but with a soft chime on every government terminal, every deep space monitoring station, and every major news network feed across the planet. The words that appeared weren't in any human language at first, just a series of pulsing symbols that flickered like distant stars. Within minutes, translation algorithms kicked in, and the message became clear. Attention, Sol 3. You are hereby summoned to declare allegiance to the hegemony of Cathar. Refusal will be interpreted as hostility. Compliance ensures survival. Resistance invites erasure. People read it over coffee. Some laughed. Others frowned. Most just kept scrolling. After all, humanity had known for decades that it wasn't alone in the universe. Strange signals had been picked up since the early 21st century. Faint whispers from deep space that didn't match any natural phenomenon. Then came the first confirmed sighting. A sleek, silent vessel drifting near Neptune, watching, recording, never speaking. Governments debated. Scientists speculated. The public grew used to the idea. Aliens existed, but they kept their distance, and so did we. Earth had been through enough of its own wars. Climate collapse, pandemics, resource shortages. They'd forced nations to finally work together, not out of idealism, but necessity. By the mid-22nd century, standing armies had mostly given way to rapid response peacekeeping forces and disaster relief units. Weapons factories now built water purifiers and fusion reactors. The world hadn't become perfect, but it had learned a hard lesson. Violence only bred more violence. So when the Cathar's ultimatum arrived, the Unified Global Council didn't panic. They met in Geneva, not in a war room, but in a sunlit chamber with windows overlooking Lake Geneva and the Alps beyond. There were no generals shouting orders. Instead, engineers, teachers, doctors, and diplomats sat around a circular table. They debated for hours, not about how to fight, but whether to respond at all. Some argued that ignoring the message might provoke an attack. Others said replying would invite more demands. In the end, they chose a third path, a simple, calm reply. We acknowledge your message. Earth chooses non-participation in interstellar conflicts. We pose no threat to your civilization. We ask only to be left in peace, that was it. No threats, no boasts. Just a quiet statement of intent. Back on the streets, life went on. Kids went to school. Farmers tended their vertical gardens. Artists painted murals on recycled polymer walls. The message from the stars became just another headline. Interesting, but not urgent. Most people assumed the aliens would move on. After all, Earth wasn't rich in rare minerals. It didn't control trade routes. Its cities weren't fortified. To an empire used to conquering resource-rich worlds or strategic strongholds, Earth seemed unimportant. And that's exactly what the Cathar thought. Their intelligence reports described humanity as a young, divided species that had only recently stopped fighting itself. Their technology was modest, their energy output insignificant, their military non-existent. The Cathar had already cataloged hundreds of such worlds, some absorbed into their empire, others left alone as irrelevant. Earth fell into the latter category, a footnote, a speck. So they sent a brief acknowledgement, cold, dismissive, and turned their attention to more valuable targets. Their fleets moved toward the Orion Spur, where three rival civilizations were locked in a brutal war over a neutron star. Earth? Not worth a second glance. But they missed something. They didn't understand that humanity's strength wasn't in its weapons or its wealth. It was in its stubborn, quiet refusal to be dragged into someone else's war, unless absolutely necessary. They didn't see that the same species that had once nearly destroyed itself over borders and beliefs had spent the last century learning how to build, heal, and cooperate. They mistook peace for passivity, calm for weakness, and that mistake would cost them dearly, though not yet. For now, Earth remained silent. Not out of fear, but out of choice. People went about their days, unaware that their simple act of saying no had already marked them in the eyes of a galactic power. They didn't know that somewhere in the void, a Cathar scout ship was already adjusting its course, drawn not by Earth's defiance, but by a tiny icy moon orbiting a distant gas giant, where a handful of humans were doing something the aliens couldn't comprehend, studying the stars not to conquer them, but to understand them. That moon, Epsilon 9, was home to only 12 people, a small research outpost barely visible on most star charts. Its mission? Monitor gravitational ripples from ancient black holes. No weapons. No soldiers. Just scientists, engineers, and a few support staff living in recycled air and recycled dreams. But the Cathar didn't care about its purpose. They cared about its location. Because unbeknownst to the humans, Epsilon 9 sat less than 0.3 light-years from a natural wormhole, one of the few stable passages through that region of space. And the Cathar needed it. So when their scouts arrived, they didn't hail the station. They didn't ask permission. They simply powered up their boarding beams and prepared to take it. What they didn't expect was the calm voice that crackled over their comms. A voice with no fear, only warning. This is Research Outpost Theta on Epsilon 9. You are entering protected scientific space. Identify your vessel and state your intent. Failure to comply will trigger automated defense protocols. The Cathar commander laughed. A guttural sound translated poorly into human audio. Primitive life form, he muttered. You have no defenses. He ordered his ship forward, and that's when the sky around Epsilon 9 lit up. Not with lasers or plasma fire, but with something far more mundane and far more terrifying. The station's outer ring, designed to deflect micrometeorites using magnetic fields and kinetic rods, activated instantly. What was meant to protect delicate instruments from space dust now became a storm of hypervelocity projectiles. The Cathar ship, sleek and arrogant, never saw it coming. Its shields, built to withstand energy weapons, shattered under the sheer physical force of thousands of tungsten slugs moving at orbital speeds. The ship broke apart in seconds. Silence returned to the moon. Back on Earth. No one even knew it had happened. Not yet. But deep in the Cathar command network, alarms blared. A report was filed. Sol 3 outpost destroyed our scout vessel. Suspect hidden military installation. Recommend full assessment. The first mistake had been made, and Earth still hadn't fired a single shot in anger. They'd just protected what was theirs. That's the thing about humans. They don't like bullies. They'll ignore you if you're just passing by. They'll even offer you help if you're lost. But if you try to take something that belongs to them, especially something they've built with their own hands, they won't shout. They won't threaten. They'll just act. And that's exactly what scared the Cathar more than any weapon ever could, because you can prepare for an army. You can plan for a fleet. But how do you fight a whole planet of people who don't want war, but won't back down when pushed? The answer, as the Cathar would soon learn, was, you don't. But that lesson was still coming. For now, on a quiet moon orbiting a frozen world, 12 humans went back to their work, checking sensors, logging data, brewing coffee in zero gravity, completely unaware that they'd just changed the fate of 2 civilizations. And back on Earth, the sun rose as it always did, casting light over cities that hummed not with war drums, but with the steady rhythm of life going on, peaceful, calm, and ready, just in case. The icy moon of Epsilon 9 wasn't on any tourist map. It wasn't even on most military ones, just a frozen rock orbiting a gas giant so far from Earth that radio signals took over 6 hours one way. 12 people lived there not because they wanted to be heroes, but because they loved the quiet. Out here, there were no cities, no traffic, no politics. Just stars, silence, and the soft hum of life support systems keeping them alive in a place that wanted them dead. Their job was simple. Watch the universe. Not to conquer it, not to claim it, just to understand it. They tracked gravitational waves from colliding black holes, mapped cosmic dust clouds, and recorded the faint echoes of the Big Bang. It was peaceful work. Boring, some might say, but to them it was everything. Then, one morning, the alarms went off. Not the usual kind. Those were for oxygen leaks or solar flares. This was different. A steady, low pulse that meant something big was coming. The station's AI flagged 3 unidentified objects entering the moon's orbital perimeter. No transponder codes, no hails, just silent, fast-moving shapes cutting through the dark. The team gathered in the main observation deck. No panic, just focus. One of them patched into the external cameras. On the screen, 3 sleek angular ships appeared, nothing like human design. Smooth, dark hulls that seemed to drink the starlight. They moved with eerie precision, forming a triangle around the outpost. Someone tried hailing them in every known protocol. Standard galactic, old UN emergency bands, even basic math sequences, nothing. Then, without warning, one of the ships fired a beam, not at the station but at the ice field 50 meters away. A chunk of frozen methane exploded into vapor. A warning shot. That's when the lead researcher stepped up to the comms, voice steady, calm, like they were talking to a lost hiker, not an alien warship. This is Research Outpost Theta on Epsilon 9. You are in protected scientific space. Identify yourselves or leave. This is your only warning. Silence. Then, the lead ship surged forward. Now, most people would assume a science station on a frozen moon has no defenses. And technically that was true. There were no missiles, no laser turrets, no soldiers. But what the aliens didn't know, and what Earth's engineers had quietly built into every off-world facility, was that survival in deep space required redundancy, adaptability, and a little bit of cleverness. The station's outer ring wasn't just for looks. It housed a micrometeorite defense system, tiny rods of tungsten, stored in magnetic launchers designed to shoot out at insane speeds to vaporize space debris before it could puncture the hull. Normally, it fired one or two at a time, but in an emergency, it could unleash the whole array in a single burst, and emergency definitely covered alien ships trying to board you. The moment the lead vessel crossed the 100-meter threshold, the system auto-activated, not because someone pressed a button, but because the AI recognized a direct threat to human life. In less than a second, over 2,000 rods shot out in a wide cone. They weren't aimed to kill, they were aimed to stop. The effect was brutal. The alien ship, built for energy shielding and plasma resistance, had no defense against physical impact at orbital velocity. Its hull crumpled like foil. Internal systems exploded. The other two ships jerked back, confused, scanning for weapons they couldn't see. But there were no hidden cannons, no secret fleet. Just a group of scientists who'd spent their lives studying the universe and who now watched wide-eyed as their tiny home defended itself with nothing more than physics and preparation. One of the researchers whispered, "Did we just destroy them?" "No," another replied, eyes on the sensors. "We just told them we're not easy prey." The remaining ships hovered for a long moment. Then, without another word, they turned and vanished into the dark. Back on the station, no one cheered. No one high-fived. They just got to work, checking for damage, rerouting power, logging the event. They sent a full report to Earth, tagged Priority Alpha, and went back to monitoring gravitational ripples. Life had to go on, even after you'd just scared off an alien warship. But thousands of light years away, in the heart of the Cathar hegemony, things were not so calm. The Scout Fleet's last transmission had been received. Not just the visuals of the attack, but the data, speed, force, trajectory. Their analysts couldn't believe it. The energy signature was minimal. No fusion spikes, no antimatter traces, just kinetic impact, like throwing rocks, but at speeds that defied their understanding of material science. "How?" a Cathar commander growled. "A primitive outpost with no military designation repels a Class 3 scout vessel using debris? Worse, their scans showed no hidden weapons platforms, no fleet in orbit, just a single fragile structure clinging to a dead moon. That made it even more terrifying. Because if this was what a research station could do, what was Earth hiding? Rumors spread through the hegemony's command chain. Some said Sol 3 was a trap, a decoy world masking a hidden superweapon. Others claimed humans were masters of deception, luring enemies into false confidence. A few even whispered that Earth wasn't just peaceful, it was patient. None of them considered the truth that humans didn't build weapons to fight. They built tools to survive. And when survival was threatened, those tools could become very dangerous without ever being meant to. Meanwhile, on Epsilon 9, the team received a message from Earth. Short, reassuring. "Stand by. No further action required. Continue mission." They didn't know it yet, but their quiet act of self-defense had lit a fuse across the galaxy. The Cathar couldn't ignore Earth anymore. Not after this. To retreat now would make them look weak in front of 100 conquered species watching their every move. So they made a decision, not out of strategy but pride. They would send a proper fleet. Not scouts, not probes. A full strike group, enough firepower to glass a continent. They'd show this peaceful world what happened to those who defied the hegemony. They chose Geneva as their target. Why? Because their outdated intelligence still listed it as Earth's political center. They didn't know that Earth hadn't had a capital in the old sense for decades. That power was distributed. That cities weren't fortresses, they were communities. So when the Cathar Armada dropped out of warp over Geneva, they expected panic, barricades, military jets scrambling to meet them. Instead, they found a city hosting a children's robotics fair in the main square, a peace summit in the old UN building, street musicians playing under solar-powered lamps. People looked up, saw the massive ships blotting out the sun, and pulled out their phones not to run, to record. Within minutes, live feeds from Geneva were streaming worldwide. Kids pointed at the sky, asking if it was a new kind of drone show. Teachers calmly ushered students indoors, not in fear, but as routine. A street vendor kept serving synth noodles, muttering about bad for business. The Cathar commanders watched from orbit, baffled. Where was the resistance? The fear, the surrender? What they didn't realize was that humanity's response had already begun, not with guns, but with networks. With knowledge, with the quiet, collective understanding that when your home is threatened, everyone plays a part. But that story was for another day. For now, on a frozen moon far away, 12 humans sipped recycled coffee, stared at the stars, and hoped their message had been clear. We're not looking for a fight, but don't mistake us for harmless. The Cathar ships hung in the sky over Geneva like storm clouds made of metal, silent, huge, and full of threat. From the ground, they blocked out the sun, casting long shadows over parks, rooftops, and the winding streets below. Most people had never seen anything like it. But instead of screaming or running, they did what humans always do when something strange happens. They looked up, pulled out their devices, and started sharing. Within minutes, the whole world knew. Not through official news channels, but through shaky phone videos, drone footage, and live streams from balconies and schoolyards. A kid filming a robot dance competition suddenly panned up and caught a warship gliding overhead. A street artist live streaming a mural project zoomed in on the alien hulls, wondering out loud if they were real. Even the Peace Summit delegates paused their talk, stepped outside, and just watched. No one panicked. Not because they weren't scared, but because panic didn't help. Over the last century, Earth had faced too many real crises. Rising seas, food shortages, system failures, to waste energy on fear without action. So people did what they knew how to do. They got ready. In Mumbai, engineers rerouted power from solar grids into citywide capacitor banks just in case. In São Paulo, drone operators, used to delivering medicine and spare parts, switched their fleets to surveillance mode, mapping the alien ships' movements in real time. In Nairobi, community networks activated emergency mesh protocols, creating backup communication lines that didn't rely on satellites or cell towers. And in Geneva itself, teachers calmly walked students to underground learning hubs, not as a drill, but as a normal response to unusual sky activity. The Cathar expected surrender. They expected humans to beg, to offer tribute, to show weakness. What they got was something far more unsettling: calm competence. From orbit, their commanders watched in confusion. Where were the armies? The missile silos? The frantic radio chatter? Instead, they saw neighborhoods lighting up with soft, steady glows, backup power kicking in. They saw small aerial vehicles zipping between buildings, not attacking, just observing. They even intercepted a broadcast from a local radio station that was still playing music, with a calm voice saying, "If you're seeing large objects in the sky, please stay indoors, keep your comms open, and avoid unnecessary travel. We'll update you as we learn more." It wasn't defiance. It wasn't aggression. It was just life continuing. That unnerved the Cathar more than any battle cry ever could. Back on Earth, no central command gave orders. There was no war room. Instead, decisions happened locally, organically. A factory in Seoul switched from making water filters to assembling signal jammers, because someone remembered old schematics from a civil defense archive. A group of university students in Toronto used open-source code to flood the aliens' comms with harmless data packets, weather reports, poetry, children's songs, just to see if they could disrupt their systems. It wasn't an attack. It was a test. And it worked better than anyone expected. The Cathar ships began glitching. Navigation systems flickered. Sensor arrays misread buildings as energy sources. One vessel even drifted too close to a mountain, and had to fire emergency thrusters to avoid a collision. Their tech, built for clean, predictable warfare, wasn't ready for a planet where every streetlight, every traffic drone, every home rotor could become part of a defense network. Then came the moment that changed everything. A Cathar boarding pod detached from the main ship, heading straight for a quiet residential block in Geneva. Its mission: capture a human for biological analysis. Standard procedure. They'd done it on dozens of worlds. Grab one specimen, study it, learn its weaknesses, but they picked the wrong street. The pod landed softly in a schoolyard. Before the hatch even opened, neighborhood sensors flagged it as an unknown object. Within seconds, local response protocols activated. Not weapons, deterrents. High-frequency sound emitters, designed to scare off wild animals, switched on. Non-lethal pulse fields used to contain industrial accidents surrounded the pod. And then, from every window, balcony, and rooftop nearby, people appeared. Not with guns. With cameras. With lights. With voices. "Leave," someone called out in clear, simple words. "This is our home." The Cathar soldiers inside hesitated. They'd been trained for combat, not for being watched by 100 calm, unafraid faces. One of them stepped out, armored and imposing. A child, no older than 8, stood at the edge of the yard holding a tablet. On the screen was a live translation app. "You are not welcome here," the tablet read aloud in the alien's own language, thanks to linguistic AI that had been studying their earlier transmissions. That did it. The Cathar soldier froze. This wasn't resistance. This was rejection. Not with violence, but with dignity, with unity. And that's when the global response truly kicked in. Every city, every town, every village with a working network sent a signal. Not to the aliens, but to each other. They touched one of us. They're touching all of us. Factories that made farming drones started printing sensor pods. Power grids synced to create rolling energy surges that could mimic weapon signatures. Even entertainment satellites were repurposed to bounce signals, creating false radar ghosts across the sky. The Cathar suddenly found themselves surrounded, not by an army, but by an entire planet that had quietly decided, enough. No one had declared war. No government had fired a shot. But in that moment, humanity spoke with one voice, not through leaders, but through action. Through the baker who shared his generator with the clinic. Through the programmer who coded a jammer in her kitchen. Through the old man who stood on his porch with a flashlight, shining it at the sky like a silent no. From orbit, the Cathar fleet saw something they couldn't understand. Their scanners showed no weapons buildup, no troop movements. Just activity. Constant, coordinated, peaceful activity that somehow made their own war machines feel small and clumsy. One of their commanders finally broke protocol and sent a message down. "Why do you resist? We only seek compliance." The reply came not from a general, but from a public broadcast channel, patched together from a dozen cities at once. "We don't resist. We protect." There's a difference, and in that difference, the Cathar realized their terrible mistake. They hadn't invaded a weak world. They'd challenged a species that had spent 100 years learning how to care for each other and how to defend that care without losing its soul. The fleet hovered, uncertain. For the first time in centuries, the mighty hegemony didn't know what to do next. Because you can defeat an army. But how do you conquer a planet that won't fight, yet won't yield? The Cathar fleet still hung over Earth, but something had shifted. It wasn't just that their ships were glitching or their sensors were confused. It was that they no longer understood what they were facing. This wasn't a war. It wasn't even resistance in the way they knew it. It was something quieter, deeper, and far more dangerous. Unity without violence. Back on the ground, people weren't celebrating. They weren't shouting or waving flags. They were working. In every corner of the planet, ordinary lives turned into quiet acts of defense, not out of hatred but out of care. A woman in Jakarta rerouted her neighborhood's solar array to power a signal tower that jammed alien comms. A group of teenagers in Reykjavik used old drone racing gear to map blind spots in the fleet's coverage. In the Andes, farmers shared real-time weather data that helped predict how atmospheric distortion might hide small craft from alien scanners. No one was told to do this. No orders came from above. It just happened. Because when your home is threatened, you protect it. And Earth wasn't just a planet to these people. It was their garden, their classroom, their shared story. The Cathar, used to worlds that either surrendered or fought with armies and bombs, had no playbook for this. Their intelligence kept reporting contradictions. No military activity detected, yet all infrastructure is responding as if under coordinated defense. Civilian networks show no aggression, but every node is sharing tactical data. Population remains calm, but readiness is at maximum. Then came the turning point, not with a battle, but with a broadcast. Someone in a small studio in Lisbon patched together a global feed using old emergency protocols and open-source software. They didn't speak for governments. They spoke for people. The message was simple, clear, and carried in dozens of languages at once. We did not ask for this. We do not want your war. But if you harm one of us, you face all of us, not as soldiers, but as neighbors. Leave now and we will remember your choice. Stay and you will learn why we chose peace. The Cathar command ship received the transmission. For the first time, their leaders felt something unfamiliar. Doubt. They ordered a final test. A single strike, not on a city, but on a remote power relay in the Arctic. Something small. Something they thought wouldn't provoke a full response. Just enough to show Earth they meant business. They were wrong. Within minutes of the strike, the entire planet reacted, not with anger, but with precision. The damaged relay was already being rebuilt by autonomous repair bots sent from 3 different nations. But more importantly, Earth systems began to adapt. Solar farms across the equator redirected stored energy to fill the gap. Undersea cables rerouted data. Even household batteries in smart homes across Europe fed surplus power back into the grid. The blackout never happened. And then the real response began. Not weapons. Not threats, just consequences. Cargo drones, normally used to deliver medicine or spare parts, started swarming near the Cathar ships, not to attack but to drop tiny devices that clung to hulls and emitted low-frequency pulses, harmless to humans but enough to scramble alien navigation. Traffic control AIs designed to manage self-driving vehicles began broadcasting false coordinates that made the Cathar's own systems misread Earth's surface, turning empty fields into power plants and quiet lakes into missile silos. Even the weather stations got involved. High-altitude balloons, usually used for climate monitoring, released reflective particles that created temporary mirages in the upper atmosphere, confusing long-range scanners. It wasn't warfare. It was Earth's everyday tech, turned gently, cleverly against an enemy that didn't understand how deeply humans were woven into their own world. The Cathar ships started making mistakes. One nearly collided with a civilian satellite it hadn't seen. Another fired a warning shot at what it thought was a weapons platform, only to realize it was a floating greenhouse growing food for a coastal city. The more they tried to assert control, the more the planet seemed to slip through their fingers like water. And then came the moment that broke them. A Cathar commander, frustrated and desperate, authorized a scan of a school in Geneva, the same one near the landing site. He wanted biological data, weaknesses, anything to justify escalation. But the moment their probe entered the building, every classroom tablet, every smartboard, every student's learning device activated at once. Not to fight, but to teach. They flooded the probe with open educational content. Math lessons, music, stories about cooperation, videos of children planting trees, building robots, helping each other. The data stream was so rich, so human, that the Cathar analysts couldn't process it. It wasn't code. It wasn't strategy. It was life. One of their scientists reviewing the feed whispered something that was later erased from official logs. They're not hiding weapons. They're showing us why they don't need them. That was the truth Earth had lived for generations. Peace wasn't weakness. It was the result of hard choices, shared effort, and the belief that building was better than breaking. And now, that belief was their shield. The Cathar fleet began to pull back, not in defeat, but in confusion. Their commanders argued. Some wanted to burn the planet from orbit. Others warned that doing so might trigger a response from other species watching silently from the shadows. But the real fear wasn't external. It was internal. If a species this primitive could stand together without violence, what did that say about the hegemony's own way of ruling through fear? On Earth, no one celebrated. They just kept working. rebuilding, sharing, watching the skies because they knew the Cathar might return, but they also knew something else humanity had already won. Not by destroying the enemy, but by refusing to become one. And in the quiet hum of a million homes, factories and labs across the globe, a new truth settled in, not shouted, but lived. You can threaten our cities, you can darken our skies, but you will never break what we've built, together. Because the wrong enemy wasn't the one with the biggest guns. It was the one who forgot that kindness, when tested, can be the strongest force in the universe. The Cathar fleet didn't leave with a bang. There were no explosions, no final warnings, no dramatic retreat. One morning they were just gone, vanished from the skies over Geneva, from the sensors tracking them near the moon, from every deep space monitor watching the edges of the solar system. It was as if they'd never been there at all, except for the scorched patch in the Arctic where their test strike had landed, and the quiet hum of Earth systems slowly returning to normal. People didn't cheer. They didn't throw parties or declare victory. Instead, they did what they always did after a storm passed. They checked on each other. A neighbor brought soup to the family whose power had flickered during the crisis. A group of students in Chile uploaded all their drone footage to a public archive, so future generations could learn from it. In Tokyo, engineers quietly upgraded the micro-meteorite defense protocols on all off-world stations. Not out of fear, but out of responsibility. Because Earth had learned something important. Peace isn't the absence of threat. It's the presence of readiness, care, and the quiet courage to stand together without becoming what you oppose. Weeks passed. Then months. The world didn't go back to normal because normal had changed. People spoke more openly about what had happened. Not as a war, but as a moment of clarity. They realized how deeply connected they were, not just through networks and power grids, but through shared values. No one had been ordered to help. No one had been paid to act. They'd simply done what felt right because protecting each other had become second nature. And then, something unexpected happened. First, it was just a blip, a faint signal from deep space. Not in Cathar code, but in a pattern no one recognized. It repeated every 12 hours, calm and steady like a heartbeat. Scientists decoded it slowly, carefully. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a message in words. It was a question, "Are you still there?" Then came another signal, this time from a different part of the galaxy. And another. Within a year, over 24 alien civilizations had reached out, not with demands, not with weapons, just with curiosity. Some sent simple mathematical greetings. Others shared star maps or climate data from their own worlds. A few even asked, gently, how Earth had stood its ground without firing a single aggressive shot. The unified Global Council didn't issue grand statements. Instead, they opened public channels, inviting teachers, artists, farmers, and engineers to share what life on Earth was really like. Not the polished version, but the real one. Messy, hopeful, full of mistakes and second chances. They broadcast footage of community gardens growing on rooftops, kids learning to code in rural villages, cities powered entirely by wind and sun. They didn't hide their past, they showed how they'd learned from it. And the galaxy listened. One species, small and insect-like, sent back a message that made people pause. You refuse to become monsters to fight monsters. That is rare. That is brave. Another, from a water world light years away, shared their own story of nearly destroying themselves before choosing cooperation. They asked if Earth would help them build something similar. Not weapons, but systems for clean water and shared knowledge. Slowly, quietly, Earth became something new. Not a military power, not a hidden threat, but a kind of compass. Not because it was perfect, but because it had chosen a different path and stuck to it, even when tested. The Cathar never returned. But rumors spread through the galactic networks that their empire had begun to crack. Some of their subject worlds, inspired by Earth's example, started asking for more than just survival. They demanded dignity, voice, peace. The hegemony, built on fear, found itself facing a new kind of resistance, not with guns, but with hope. Back on Earth, life went on. Children played under open skies, trains ran on solar power. Old conflicts faded into history lessons. But something had shifted in the way people saw themselves. They weren't just citizens of a country or a continent anymore. They were part of a story that now reached beyond the stars. a story about what happens when a species decides that kindness isn't weakness, and that protecting your home doesn't mean you have to destroy someone else's. Years later, when new students asked how Earth had faced the aliens and won, teachers didn't talk about weapons or battles. They told the story of the schoolyard in Geneva, how a child with a tablet, a street vendor serving noodles, and a grandmother shining a flashlight at the sky had done more to defend their world than any army ever could. Because in the end, the Cathar hadn't lost to firepower. They'd lost to something they couldn't measure, the quiet strength of people who refused to hate even when threatened. And that became Earth's real legacy, not conquest, but connection. Not dominance, but dignity. Star charts were redrawn. Old maps that labeled Earth as Sol 3 non-aligned, low priority were updated. Now next to the blue-green dot in the Orion arm, a new note appeared in dozens of alien languages. Do not provoke. They choose peace, but they will not be broken. And whenever a new species drifted too close, curious or careless, they'd receive a simple, calm message, broadcast not from a war room, but from 1,000 everyday places across the planet. We mean no harm. But if you come in peace, you'll find friends. If you come with threats, you'll learn why we earned our quiet. The universe, it turned out, respected that kind of strength far more than brute force. And Earth just kept growing, its cities greener, its people kinder. Its eyes still turned toward the stars, not with fear, but with wonder. Because the greatest victory wasn't driving the enemy away. It was proving that you didn't have to become them to survive. And in a galaxy full of empires built on fear, that simple truth became the most powerful thing of all.